It began the way most disasters do, quietly, almost invisibly, like a crack forming beneath polished marble. At first, it was just a letter in my mailbox. White envelope, no return address, the kind of thing you toss on the counter and forget until it festers in the back of your mind. Inside was a violation notice from the Oak Crest Valley Homeowners Association. The reason? Unapproved paint color on exterior trim. Which was rich, considering I hadn't repainted anything since I bought the place 4 years ago. The trim was still the exact same sandy beige it had always been. Approved. Boring. HOA sanctioned to the last brushstroke. But I didn't fight it. I paid the $75 fine, chalked it up to a clerical error, and went back to my life. I should have known better. My name is Lucas Granger. 41 years old. Environmental engineer by training, rancher by inheritance. My land sits on the eastern edge of the HOA's jurisdiction, although technically it's not even part of Oak Crest Valley. My father had that written into the original deed. We're grandfathered in. Independent. Free. Or we were. The HOA president, Karen Delacroix, had other ideas. Karen was the kind of woman who wore tennis skirts but never played tennis, carried a clipboard like it was a weapon, and smiled like she already had the upper hand. She ran the HOA like a private militia, and when she was elected president 3 years ago, things changed fast. Rules multiplied. Fines tripled. And then came the annexations. Karen had this vision for Oak Crest. She wanted to unify the region, as she put it in one of her smug newsletters. Bring the ranchlands into the fold. Extend community standards across every acre, from the planned neighborhoods with manicured lawns to the cattle pastures that had existed long before the first stucco home broke ground. She called it progress. I called it what it was, a power grab. The first time we met, she showed up at my gate uninvited, wearing a pastel blazer and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I just wanted to talk, she said, as if this was a friendly neighborly visit. Your fencing. It's not quite in alignment with community aesthetic guidelines. I stared at her over the top rail of the gate. I'm not in your community. Her smile didn't falter. That's a bit of a gray area, Lucas. We've recently redrawn our community lines. You should have received the proposal packet. I didn't. Well, in that case, consider this a courtesy stop. We'd love to have you join the HOA formally. There are benefits, community security patrols, landscaping subsidies, infrastructure enhancements. I have a private well, a functioning septic, and my own road grader. I think I'll manage. Her eyes flickered. Still, regulations are regulations. That was the first warning. The second came 2 weeks later, when a crew showed up at my property line with surveying equipment and clipboards. When I confronted them, they said they were conducting infrastructure assessments for upcoming improvements. I told them to leave. They didn't argue, just packed up and left like it was a rehearsal. Which, as it turns out, it was. Because 3 months later, I came home from town to find bulldozers on my front lawn. And they weren't grading roads. They were tearing down my house. No court order. No warning. No legal backing. Just an army of hired men in hard hats with laminated work orders stamped Oak Crest Valley HOA and a signature at the bottom, Karen Delacroix. I stood there, gravel dust in my throat, watching my life splinter under the teeth of a backhoe. My hands were shaking. My vision tunneled. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there. When Karen finally appeared, she was smiling again. This is for your own good, she said. Non-compliant structures are a hazard. You were notified. She handed me a stack of violations. Most of them were fake. All of them were signed by her. I slept in my truck that night, 20 yards from the smoking rubble of what used to be my living room. And as I lay there, a bitter silence wrapped around me like a second skin. That's when I remembered something she'd said, months ago. We'll be taking over water management soon, too. It was meant to be a threat. But I already knew something she didn't. The entire Oak Crest Valley HOA, including their prized ranch with 1,500 sheep, relied on one water source. My water source. The well was on my land. The pipeline ran through my soil. And the only pump that kept those sheep alive sat behind a rusted steel hatch that no one touched but me. Karen had made a mistake. A big one. Because when you destroy a man's home without cause or warning, you don't just make an enemy. You create a reckoning. And I was about to turn off the water supply to her empire, forever. You'd think the moment I shut the pump off would have felt satisfying. It didn't. It felt like flipping the kill switch on something I'd spent half my life protecting. But sometimes you don't get to choose your wars, you just get to choose when to fire the first shot. And mine came at 6:47 a.m. on a Thursday. The main pump house is tucked into a grove of cottonwoods, about a mile and a half from the road. It's old, built by my father in the 80s, when gravity-fed wells were still more common than community water meters. There's no cell signal out there. No cameras. Just a metal shed, a manual override panel, and a handwritten logbook that goes back decades. I turned the valve. Flicked the circuit breaker. And listened to the old diesel generator groan into silence. Then I walked back to the ranch and waited. It didn't take long. By noon, I had 4 missed calls from an unknown number. Then a text. "Lucas, this is Karen. We need to talk. Call me immediately." I didn't reply. By 4 p.m., the first truck arrived. White Ford F-250. HOA insignia on the door. 2 men in uniform jumped out, looked around, then started walking toward the pump house without permission or a word. I watched them from my porch, chewing a cold sandwich and sipping coffee that had gone stale hours ago. Bear, my old hound, lay at my feet, twitching in his sleep like he was chasing rabbits in his dreams. I didn't move. Didn't yell. Just watched. Because I knew they weren't going to find anything helpful in that pump house. The real shutoff wasn't at the main line. It was in the pressure vault under my barn. The only way to restore water to the HOA's prized livestock ranch was to ask me. And I wasn't answering. By Friday morning, chaos had a name. It started with rumors. Someone on the Oak Crest community Facebook page posted a blurry picture of a dry trough. The caption was simple. "No water. What's going on?" Within hours, dozens of comments piled in. Sheep ranchers. Gardeners. People whose fancy smart irrigation systems weren't humming anymore. Panic was a slow leak at first. Then it exploded. Karen called again. Then again. Then she showed up. I heard her tires before I saw her face, the aggressive crunch of gravel under tread. She stormed up the porch steps like she owned the place, fury radiating off her like heat from a bonfire. I didn't stand. I didn't smile. She didn't knock. "Turn it back on," she snapped. "Now." "Good morning to you too," I said calmly. "This isn't a joke, Lucas. You've endangered livestock. Do you understand how serious this is?" "I do." "Then what the hell are you doing?" I looked up at her and took a slow breath. "Teaching you what power really looks like." Karen blinked. For once, she didn't have a comeback ready. So I stood. Walked down the steps until we were face to face. She had on one of her HOA blazers again, pale blue this time, with a gold pin that read Oak Crest Executive Chair. It looked like it had cost more than my last grocery bill. "You destroyed my home," I said. "Without a warrant. Without a hearing. Without a damn ounce of due process. And now you want something from me? That was a mistake. No. That was a choice. And now you get to live with mine." She went pale. "I'll have you arrested," she said, but the threat sounded hollow, even to her own ears. "For what?" I asked. "Sabotaging my own well? On my own land? There's no water sharing contract, Karen. No legal claim. You built your ranch on the assumption that goodwill would last forever. I took a step forward. That goodwill is gone. She didn't speak for a long time. Just stared at me, breathing fast. Then she turned on her heel and walked back to her car. By the time she slammed the door, her eyes were wild. That's when I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. By Sunday, the sheep started dying. I didn't want that. I didn't want animals to suffer. But this wasn't about the sheep. This was about Karen and the empire she'd built on stolen authority. She tried everything. She called in a water truck. I turned it away at the gate. She contacted the county. The county told her the infrastructure was private. She even went on the local news, holding a microphone in one hand and a shriveled plant in the other, crying about a rogue landowner who was threatening the community's way of life. But Oak Crest wasn't listening anymore. They were watching. Watching how she had demolished a man's house without cause, and now couldn't fix the mess she'd created. Because the water wasn't coming back. Not until I said so. And I wasn't in a forgiving mood. They say fear spreads faster than fire. By the end of the week, Karen Delacroix wasn't feared anymore. She was questioned. It started small. A few murmurs in the community forum. An anonymous flyer taped to the HOA office door. Who gave Karen the authority to demolish a man's home? Then someone posted the video. Not mine. Not yet. It was doorbell footage from a neighbor 3 blocks over. The day my house came down. You could see the bulldozer roll in, unannounced. Karen standing off to the side, arms folded, barking into a phone. A man's voice can be heard shouting, "There's no permit on file." But the driver shrugs and keeps going. The caption beneath the post said, "What if it was your house?" That post stayed up for 11 minutes before the HOA page moderators deleted it. But the damage was done. By Monday morning, the board was in disarray. Board members who once followed Karen like ducklings began to distance themselves. One even posted publicly, "I was told Lucas had abandoned the property. I never saw a demolition order. I thought it was approved through the city. Only it wasn't." And now they were afraid. Afraid of lawsuits. Afraid of liability. Afraid of the truth. Because what none of them knew, not yet, was that I hadn't just shut off the water. I had been documenting everything. Every email, every violation, every backdoor maneuver Karen had made to consolidate her power. And now I was working with someone who had the means to make it all very public. Her name was Dr. Naomi Reyes. Civil engineer. Environmental law professor. And my former colleague from when I worked with the state's Department of Water Resources. I called her 3 days after the house came down. She didn't ask if I was okay. She asked where to meet. "They're about to learn what happens," she said, scanning the HOA development maps, "when you mess with the guy who owns the valve." We sat in the barn, the only structure they hadn't touched, poring over water rights documents and historical agreements. I handed her my grandfather's original land survey, the deed language specifying sole access and control of the aquifer. Naomi's eyes lit up. "This isn't just leverage," she whispered. "This is a noose." We filed the paperwork the next day. Emergency injunction. Cease and desist against HOA claims to shared water infrastructure. Formal notification to the County Board of Health, warning of unsanitary conditions due to livestock dehydration, caused solely by HOA negligence and illegal activity. And a civil suit. Filed under wrongful demolition of property, trespassing, fraudulent claims, and retaliatory land annexation. Karen didn't see it coming. Because while she was busy trying to paint me as a villain, her house of cards was already folding. The rebellion didn't take long. The sheep ranchers turned first. They had the most to lose. With their animals dying and no backup source, desperation turned into fury. A town hall was called, this time without Karen. They met in the school gymnasium, and over 200 residents showed up. A former board member stood up with a folder in his hands. "This," he said, holding up a set of emails, "is a correspondence chain between Karen and the demolition crew. She authorized it. She signed it. No board vote. No permit." Gasps rippled through the room. He didn't stop. "These are photos of Lucas Granger's property before and after the demolition. Here's the house. Here's the rubble. And here," he paused, holding up a final page, "is the registered deed proving he owns the land and the well that supplies water to all of us." Silence. A silence so heavy it felt like the ceiling might collapse under the weight of it. Then someone stood and clapped. Then another. Then half the room. Karen wasn't just in trouble. She was done. I wasn't there that night. I didn't need to be. But the next morning, a white envelope appeared at the base of my gate. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "We were wrong. We're sorry. Please restore the water. The Ranchers of Oak Crest." Attached was a petition. 58 signatures. Some names I recognized. Most I didn't. The note was handwritten, not typed. For the first time in weeks, I let myself exhale. Then I turned on the radio and listened to the news. The headline? HOA president under investigation after unauthorized demolition. Karen's face was on the screen. She wasn't smiling anymore. And the real reckoning was just beginning. The courthouse smelled like paper, coffee, and tension. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Naomi, who wore her glasses low on her nose and tapped her pen like a metronome. Across from us sat Karen Delacroix, wrapped in a designer blazer 2 sizes too tight, flanked by 2 visibly nervous attorneys who'd clearly been called in last minute. She didn't look at me. That was fine. I wasn't there for eye contact. I was there for truth. The judge, a silver-haired man with a reputation for sharp rulings and zero patience for pettiness, entered the room and called the session to order. From that moment on, the unraveling became official. "Mr. Granger," the judge began, flipping through the complaint file. "You allege the Oak Crest Valley HOA illegally demolished your residence. You further allege they falsified violations, bypassed municipal procedure, and acted with retaliatory intent following your refusal to integrate into the association. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And what is your position on the water cutoff?" Naomi leaned forward. "We argue it was a proportional defensive action. The HOA knowingly depended on a private water source it did not control, and had no contract or easement rights to use." Karen's attorney jumped up. "Your Honor, that's not true." The judge held up a hand. "I've read the deed. The well is on Mr. Granger's property. Control is his. Now, I'd like to hear about this demolition." And that's when the real carnage began. Naomi presented the evidence like a surgeon, precise, clean, and devastating. Email chains. Voicemail transcripts. Security footage. Screenshots of Karen's digital authorization sent to the demolition crew. Photos of the property before and after. And finally, the city's own permit log showing no record of approval. The judge's face darkened with every new document. Then came the final blow. A financial audit Naomi had dug up just days before. It showed that HOA funds, meant for landscaping and community events, had been rerouted through a consulting firm owned by Karen's brother-in-law. Tens of thousands of dollars missing. Karen's hands visibly trembled. Her attorney whispered something in her ear. She shook her head. The judge set down his pen. "This is not just negligence," he said slowly. "It borders on criminal conduct." The courtroom was silent except for the faint buzz of the overhead lights. "I will be referring this matter to the district attorney for review of possible charges," he said. "As for the civil complaint, Mr. Granger, you are awarded full damages for property loss, attorney's fees, and emotional distress. The HOA is hereby barred from all contact with your land or water systems, effective immediately." Karen stood like she'd been slapped. I didn't even look her way as I walked out of the courtroom. Because this wasn't the end. Not yet. The final move came 2 weeks later. Karen had resigned, of course. Publicly disgraced. The HOA was under full audit, and 3 other board members had already stepped down. The sheep ranchers had found a temporary water supplier, but it was expensive and limited. The mood in Oak Crest was somewhere between humbled and humiliated. And that's when I showed up. At the community meeting. Uninvited. I walked in wearing boots still dusted with ranch dirt, holding a single piece of paper. Gasps followed me like shadows. I stood at the front, unfolded the paper, and read. I, Lucas Granger, the legal owner of the Oak Crest Aquifer Source, hereby offer to construct a permanent secondary water line, free of charge, to service livestock properties in the community. This offer is contingent on one condition: Oak Crest Valley HOA is formally dissolved and restructured under neutral, rotating leadership with no permanent executive positions. Silence. Then someone clapped. Then everyone did. Karen wasn't there to see it. But she heard about it. I know because a few days later, I found a letter at my gate. The handwriting was tight. Controlled. Forced. You won. I hope it was worth it. I didn't reply. Because it wasn't about winning. It was about reminding people like Karen that power, real power, doesn't come from clipboards, bylaws, or laminated badges. It comes from principle. From standing your ground. And sometimes, from turning off the tap until the world learns what it means to respect the source.